connecting investors, financial institutions, and businesses around the world. Luxembourg is a centre of excellence for global finance. Recognised for its unique international financial expertise, Luxembourg is solution-driven, stable, and open to innovation. A pioneer and global leader in sustainable finance, we help build a better tomorrow today. An international financial centre and a European capital. Luxembourg is an exceptional and welcoming place to work and live. Discover what we can do for you.
Welcome to Focus On, bringing together financial industry experts of different horizons, sharing and discussing their insights.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our new Focus On event, which will shed light on the RegTech sector today. The global financial crisis of 2008 triggered increasing waves of financial regulation to bring more stability and better risk management in the industry. This led to stronger compliance and transparency requirements, which brought about rising costs and time-consuming processes for financial institutions. This is where regulatory technology, most commonly known as RegTech, proved to play a pivotal role in facilitating compliance needs and risk management with innovative, cost-effective solutions. As a result, the RegTech sector has been enjoying significant growth and success in recent years, from a global market size valued at less than $3 billion in 2019 to close to $10 billion in 2022. Despite the fact that the technology sector has been suffering from the current global turbulent market conditions, we expect the RegTech sector to sustain its growth with a minimum 15% compound annual growth rate between 2021 and 2030 to reach $44 billion in revenues by that time. This is because RegTech is applicable in multiple spheres, and whether you're a bank, an insurer, an asset manager, or any financial sector practitioner really, you will be confronted with improving data management, your regulatory reporting, your compliance processes, and your risk and fraud prevention. All of this are being facilitated through advancements in RegTech. This is why I am delighted to gather today various financial experts working directly in the field who will speak from experience to let you know about how RegTech impacts their operations. And I hope that today's event brings you valuable insights that may be of interest to your own organization. Without further ado, I am happy to welcome our first speaker of the day, Nicole Sandler, Head of Digital Policy at Barclays, who will set the scene for us. I'm happy to introduce our first speaker of the day, Nicole Sandler, Head of Digital Policy at Barclays, who is joining us from London today. Nicole engages regularly with policymakers and regulators throughout the globe on the impacts of regulatory technology-related regulations and initiatives. A warm welcome to you, Nicole.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me speak today. I think it's great to be doing events like this, so thank you very much.
We are very happy to have you on board. First, to kick off our discussion on the relevance of RegTech and is it just for fun or fundamental, I wanted to ask you, in your position of Head of Digital Policy and with the increasing regulatory burden, why do you think RegTech is so important for the financial industry today?
So I think that's a really fair question to begin with. So I've been very fortunate. I've worked in digital policy for about 8 years now. Now, that might not sound very long, but in the digital policy space, it's a little bit like dog years. And RegTech has really been an interest right from the start. I think one of the challenges is when I think about RegTech, so compliance is really vital to success of any firm. But compliance isn't thought of as a revenue generating function. But there are costs that come with not complying. So there are things like fines, there are reputational costs, there are advisor fees. And, as the years have gone on, financial institutions such as Barclays and others, well, we face increasing and tighter regulatory checks, which makes sense. We have a lot of activities and our regulators want to know what's going on. And these are regulators across the globe. There's been an increasing recognition that there are technologies, and I don't like to use the term new technologies, so technologies such as AI, machine learning, they can offer large cost savings for firms. So, when I think about manual regulatory reporting and compliance, it's very labor intensive. So there are cost savings you can get there. Now, I read something a number of years ago. So I said I've been working in this space for 8 years. Now, I read something that there was an increase between 2008 and 2016 of over 500% an increase in regulatory changes in developed markets. Clearly, that was showing the need for more scalable and efficient and reliable RegTech solutions. So I think you can see that it's not about fun, it's about fundamentally making sure that financial institutions are meeting their obligations in the most efficient and best ways possible. So I think that really answers your question. I mean, I like my job, so it is fun, but it's definitely fundamental why we're looking at RegTech.
Quite right, I agree with you. And as you rightly pointed out, RegTech solutions can facilitate compliance processes for financial institutions. But aside from this, what are the other main use cases that you see for RegTech within the financial industry today?
So, as you mentioned, RegTech can bring a number of benefits, and there are a number of areas where we may see more benefits than others. So, when I think about these are the things like onboarding, monitoring, detection, reporting. One of the areas that's been a main focus has been fraud detection. There's also things like where you're mapping and tracking regulatory policy. Long-term horizon tracking is another area, and one very important area is supervisory reporting, which we touched upon earlier. When I think about supervisory reporting, I think of the Digital Regulatory Reporting Initiative that was being done by the UK policymakers, along with other policymakers in other jurisdictions. I also think about a RegTech proposition that Barclays underwent with fintechs and others in the FCA sandbox a number of years ago. It was back in 2017. And the idea of that test was to track updates to regulations within the FCA handbook and then align them to implementation of Barclays' internal policies. And this is, I think, one of the key themes that came across from both the Digital Regulatory Reporting Initiative and also the Sandbox test is collaboration. We were doing these things with other firms. Because I think a key thing that needs to be recognised is all of these challenges, they're not firm specific, they're industry challenges. So that's why collaboration is so important, both within industry and also globally as well. So those are some of the key things that I think are benefits in the areas that we've been looking at.
Right, and you highlighted some of the benefits and opportunities for RegTech already with automation, cost reduction, better customer experience as well. But it's true that still many regulated financial institutions have yet to implement some RegTech solution throughout their organization. Why do you think is that so?
No, I think that's a really fair question, and it's one that I've been asked over the years. Because when we talk about the need for RegTech, we talk about the fact that supervisory reporting can be duplicative, and technologies can be much better and really help with efficiencies, which we've touched upon. And I think the key things that would come to mind. Well, initially, when I first started working on this, I would say legacy systems. I work for a large financial institution that's been around for 300 years. Whilst our systems haven't been around for 300 years, they've definitely been around for a long time. And so I think this was one of the initial challenges. But actually, interestingly, a number of RegTech firms recognized this challenge really early on. And so where feasible, they actually adapted their solutions to work with different firm systems. So then one of the other things that often comes up, and I think this is still true, respectfully true, is legacy thinking. So a lot of these institutions, we're very large and we've been around for a long time, and it takes time to change people's mindsets. And it's not even about the mindset per se. It's, all of these solutions, they're the cost that comes with them. And all of the firms, Barclays and others across Europe, well, we have numerous other costs. So you have to make sure your senior executives are supporting investing in these solutions, but alongside the other costs that we already have. So I think it's really vital to help change the thinking to show why it's so important. And we touched on some of this earlier, the idea that there are costs that come with non-compliance. But actually, interestingly, I think one of the areas that doesn't get touched upon is you're essentially asking an unregulated firm to help a regulated firm achieve their compliance. And instinctively, one may ask, why firms are doing that. I think one of the things I found very interesting over the years was the number of RegTech firms that actually want to be regulated as well, because I think that helps them bypass some of the challenges. But I think that they're probably the main ones that come to mind at the moment. But they're not insurmountable, which is a good thing.
And actually, you talk about some of those challenges, and I think you touch upon a point that's quite interesting when you say something about mindset, is that we have challenges as well in terms of human factors, and notably, how important do you think education and skilling of the workforce are in this context?
I mean, I think it's of the utmost importance. When I think about the future, I think that there's generations that will be digitally native. However, I do not fall into that generation. Whilst I work in digital policy, actually, there are some days I struggle to get my iPhone to work. So I think upskilling in education is absolutely critical. And at Barclays, we do a load of upskilling. We have our Barclays Eagle Wings. We participate in regulatory forums. So, for instance, in Europe, you have EFIF, which is the European Forum for Innovation Facilitators. And I think about 3 years ago, it was just before COVID, we went to present on RegTech solutions at EFIF, where there were regulators from the different member states wanting to understand certain challenges and certain solutions. So that was a great way to do upskilling with our external stakeholders. Europe also has the European Commission's FinTech Lab. At the time we went and presented on AI, one of the core technologies to help with RegTech. And I think when I think about internally at Barclays, when it comes to education, so we've touched on some things which are for our regulators, there's a lot of reticence across industry and also, for our consumers as well, that there are jobs that will be replaced by these technologies. And I, to be honest, I like to think of it as tasks rather than jobs, but that goes back to you need to be educating across the board as to why this is important, what roles, tasks could be replaced, but what new tasks and roles will come off the back of this. So I think education, so people understand it, is really, really important, and that will help with the legacy thinking and the future thinking as well.
Talking about the future thinking, I have one last question for you, and that would be quite simple, is that, in your opinion, what's next for RegTech from 2023 and onwards?
So one of the things I touched on earlier was collaboration and saying how important it was between industry and policymakers. So a number of years ago, I'd say between 2017 and the end of 2019, I sat on something called the RegTech, which was the Regulatory Obstacles to Financial Innovation Expert Group at the European Commission. And one of the things we looked at was RegTech within that work, and we put out a report. I would like to see more things like that going forward, because that was really a collaboration between policymakers and the industry. And by the industry, I don't just mean financial institutions. There are only 3 banks. There's actually fintechs, academics, lawyers. So I think that would be really valuable, because that's another way to continue the collaboration and education within industry and with our policymakers. I think events such as today are really, really important. And I also think that things like using sandboxes more and having an increase in stuff being tested and more firms investing in RegTech solutions, because regulatory compliance isn't going to do this, it's going to do this. So there will be a greater need for RegTech. So I think the more testing that can be done within sandboxes, within the FF, within things like the Global Financial Innovation Network, I think that would be really valuable.
Thanks. On this very collaborative and optimistic note, we are at the end of our presentation. Thank you very much, Nicole, for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you on board. And I will now pass the floor on to Ian Atkinson, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Governance.com. Ian has more than 20 years of experience in the financial industry and the regulatory technology sector. He's notably in charge of client management and product delivery for Governance.com. So, Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Margot, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be with you here today. This morning, I am joined by Anna from TMF Group. Anna is the Transformation Manager, responsible for some very exciting change across more than 80 jurisdictions globally for TMF Group. So Anna, I mean, today we want to discuss, some of the challenges that that organisations such as yourselves face in this ever-changing environment. Whether that be to respond to additional regulatory risks, to drive efficiencies, control, or simply just to reduce cost. Please, could you just give us a brief overview of your role and some of the challenges that you are facing today, and the projects that you are implementing to go about tackling these?
Thank you so much for having us here today, and I'm so loving being here in the studio with you. So TMF, we make a complex world simple. That's what we do. We are passionate about client service delivery, making that flawless and safeguarding our clients.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Simplicity is difficult in a complex world, and there are many different challenges there. What kind of challenges do you face day to day?
So we follow the same challenges that everybody else does in the market. You've got your business challenges, you've got your regulatory requirements that you're adhering to. We multiply that over a global and 16 markets and 80 offices, so it can get quite complex.
I can imagine, and I'm guessing there is not one solution fits all.
No, it's never one solution fits all, and all of our clients are special. They're at the heart of what we do, and it's flawless client service delivery. It's a team sport.
It certainly is a team sport. So what is your main focus? I mean, how do you go about tackling this? What is the answer to addressing this complexity?
First off, it's about people and process. And then we add in that technology component. And I'm so passionate about that technology part, because you can take things that used to be really mundane or time-consuming and suddenly make them easy and simple and fast. And that is beautiful. That is really at the heart of what we do. That makes it really, gives that extra advantage to comply, to go further, to take us to the next level in the future.
So it sounds like you know what you need to do, and you've got these challenges, you want to use technology. I mean, surely it's not as simple as just applying technology on top of existing process.
Absolutely not. No, it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of design, a lot of learning to speak the same language, actually. That was one of the challenges that we had, where we're really good compliance experts, but we had to work together with some developers. And that was not the same language at all.
So in terms of trying to address this, Anna, what role would you play internally versus looking for external assistance, possibly with a RegTech firm?
That's an excellent question. So I'd like to reference something here. It's like we would be Iron Man, and the regulatory technology would be our suit, taking us to the next level of safeguarding and protecting the world, making us KYC AML superheroes.
So let me get this straight. You're saying you're Tony Stark?
Well, I'd love to be Tony Stark. I'd love to have those abilities. But of course, we're not in a film. This is not a fantasy. So we look for the best in the market. We look for where we can benefit and leverage technology that's already happening, because technology moves so fast. Our expertise is over here on KYC AML, and we want to be able to marry those two together to bring out the best from both sides.
I think that's an excellent point. So you mentioned before, the problems that you face, the challenges, the requirements that you're trying to be obligated against, they are common across other firms. So yeah, being able to leverage on an external firm with that expertise, the experience across multiple transformation projects, that brings some kind of commonality to the program that you're trying to deliver.
Exactly that. So that while technology continues to evolve, we can go and take the best of that. And use that to support our processes.
Of course, and then look, Iron Man has a different suit every time, every film. So I'm guessing this is not just a one-size-fits-all. We go out, we build something once. This has to continually evolve over time.
Exactly that, because it has to be scalable. Our needs, our dependency is being able to adapt fast enough, and that our needs are continuously growing and changing. And using technology then to support that, to make it easier, to make it more efficient, more effective, that's where the sweet spot is.
I mean, this sounds really simple, but I'm sure it's not. I'm sure there are many challenges, there are many roadblocks that you need to navigate, down the road, along the way. What sort of challenges do you find?
So what I was talking about earlier, one of the challenges was communication. And a fun example of that is the peanut butter and jelly sandwich YouTube video about exact instructions. So this is something that we had to learn. Where, in the video, you've got a dad who's a developer and he's getting his kids to write out some instructions exactly about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Simple enough, right? Anybody can do that.
Sounds simple.
Right? Do you like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
I can't say I'm a big fan.
I love them. I grew up on them. So I think, easy enough. So the kids go and they write these instructions and they give them over to their dad all proudly thinking, yay, we're gonna make sandwiches, totally ace this. Epic fail. Because the dad then executes it absolutely exactly.
Okay, so why was that a fail?
So the instructions said, take a couple pieces of bread. Dad takes out a couple pieces of bread, take a knife, stick it in the peanut butter, he just dumps it into the peanut butter. And then he takes the knife out because the next instruction is spread it on the bread, spread around the bread.
Okay.
He starts spreading around the bread.
Ah.
There's no peanut butter on it because you forgot the exact implicit instruction about how to scoop the peanut butter and how to spread it all over the bread. Because you think that's just inherent. You think that's just something logical.
So the problem is translation.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then we learn iteratively and with a lot of patience and learning a language.
Very good. And I suppose that, it's not just translation, it's a certain terminology. I mean, and think about it with you specifically, you're not just working in one single jurisdiction. You've got different complex requirements across multiple jurisdictions. So I suppose that just takes it to the next level of complexity.
It sure does. It's definitely, because you've got the cultures of it, you've got a digital culture, you've got a local culture, and you have a company culture, and that of our clients.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned culture, and I think, my take, when we were discussing peanut butter and jelly before, and, you asked me, do I like it, and I'm not a huge fan. To me, not being an American, I may think, peanut butter and jelly, they're so different. They're so, worlds apart. And I suppose I see that in, with the large institutional financial services firms working with this smaller RegTech. Some of those might be startups, they might be scale-ups, and they have completely different cultures. And, we talk a lot about communication, and communication is born out of the culture of the firm itself. So, I mean, surely this, from my perspective, brings another challenge. It isn't just about how you communicate, it's the clash of the digital cultures between the two firms. Is that something that you found?
Yes, absolutely. But it is overcomeable, especially when you can show the benefits and you take the time to reach out to the people, time to learn the language, time to bring the messages in the right way. It's all about the digital culture is far more agile, whereas our culture tends to be more waterfall.
Okay.
So you would make a framework, and the framework would be the waterfall part, and you would fill that in with all the agile. And then you have the actual, what I called before, the sweet spot.
Yeah, no, you talk about agile versus waterfall, and firms for many years now have been trying to find the perfect balance between the two. And I think that is a perfect way to describe it. The framework, the boundaries that you need to work in, but also appreciating that there are different sides, and we need to find the correct ways of working. And we talk about a partnership, and certainly governance.com, how we work with our clients, we like to work in a partnership model, because you say it's not something that you can do from day one, and it's not something that is easy to manage continuously moving forward. And while the solution needs to continually grow, that relationship needs to continually grow as well. But like, given now, we've talked about some of the challenges, we've talked about the need to bring technology in, and being able to form a partnership with RegTech to be able to build a solution for that. I mean, surely that's not the end of the journey. There's still the need to then roll this out. I mean, you need acceptance within the firm.
Yeah. So the journey continues on two sides. One, where the technology continues to advance, and the other side, where we bring it to the business. We have to explain it, train it, roll it out, deploy it, and then they come back with feedback. And that feedback is so critical for taking us again further to the next iteration.
And what kind of feedback do you see there? I mean, is that feedback on how people would adapt this in their everyday life? Do you see any resistance? What kind of challenges do you see on the people side?
Well, the key here seems to be in making it really user-friendly and intuitive. Simplicity, exactly. Yeah. And what that means for one person is not always the same for another person.
Yeah, and then we discussed this many times, being aligned on what the common goal is. And if you bring people on that journey and talk to them throughout, and everyone is aligned on that final goal. And I think you started with this. Your common goal is to deliver excellence to your clients. Then everyone should be bought into that. They can bring their ideas to the table, and it's not about changing the way you work for the sake of it. It's changing the way you work for the benefit of everybody, and ultimately for the benefit of the client at the end.
Exactly. It's multiplying the natural genius that exists already within the two teams.
The natural genius, what a fantastic term. Well, Anna, thank you so much for joining. I think that's all that we have time for today. I wish you all the best in the many years of transformation on this journey that I'm sure you've got. It is clearly a topic that you are very passionate about. So yeah, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Ian.
And so now we hand over to Oscar Fares, Head of Venture Capital at the EIF. Oscar will be talking to us about opportunities in investing in RegTech. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Oscar Fares. Thanks to Luxembourg for Finance for the invitation to this event. I will share our perspective on the RegTech industry, one of the many traditional sectors where technology is playing and will play a crucial role in making processes more efficient through automation and data analysis. Investments in RegTech companies have been clearly on the rise, and all stats confirm it. As a side note, beyond the numbers, at EIF, our compliance department is probably the fastest growing department in the last couple of years. From my point of view, there are two fundamental changes that are driving this trend. On one hand, increased regulation in the European Union, but also worldwide, as governments are reinforcing their mechanisms to ensure better investment protection and fighting against tax fraud and terrorism financing. On the other hand, the boom in fintech startups providing alternative products and services in very specific niches, but also neobanks covering the full commercial banking offering, have boosted the demand for outsourced RegTech solutions. Those trends are confirmed in our portfolio. We see more and more RegTech startups being financed by EIF-supported funds. For instance, Poke AI, an AML solution which has been recently in the news because of a financing round, and Shift Technology. I will talk about Shift Technology later on. We are also receiving new fund proposals focusing specifically in fintech strategies that obviously cover the RegTech space as well. We are, for instance, investors in a fintech fund called Finch Capital. Notwithstanding these tailwinds, last year, 2022, marked a turning point, an inflection point in the startup ecosystem worldwide. We just came out of a period of unprecedented growth in digital adoption during the COVID pandemic, both in the consumer and the enterprise space. And then suddenly we had a macroeconomic shock. It started with war, which led to inflation, which led to higher interest rates. And we are still suffering from that macroeconomic environment. These elements have clearly resulted in a tough hangover in the VC ecosystem, where fund managers, despite sitting probably on record dry powder to invest, are taking more and more time to make investment decisions, also conducting longer and deeper due diligences, and questioning company valuations. It is also evident that the demand boom experienced during the pandemic has paused, and both growth rates and path to profitability are being hit in many startups. Startups which in turn find themselves overstaffed for the current growth perspectives. And that is leading to adjustments as we read in the news every day. In any case, those of us who have been around for a while have experienced a few of these tech crises. The dot-com bubble, the great financial crisis as well. And we are convinced that the best way out of a crisis is to invest in innovation. In essence, investing in the future. EIF's strategy to adapt to the current market environment is to prioritize intervention in market gaps and pay special attention to emerging managers tackling those market gaps, as these emerging managers are the most vulnerable and are suffering the most from the current tough fundraising environment. We are currently deploying our flagship mandate, InvestEU, in collaboration with the European Commission, which has a focus precisely on emerging VC ecosystems, obviously in Europe, and targeting as well very specific thematics in many areas like digital, enabling sectors, climate, and social impact. Talking about EIF's activity during this market downturn, I would like to share with you our latest mandate, the European Tech Champions Initiative. We are very, very proud of this mandate because this is a great example of what can be achieved in Europe when member states pull together resources and a common vision. The aim of the mandate is to create between 10 and 15 European VC funds with sizes above 1 billion euros. The objectives of this fund should be to lead financing rounds of European scale-ups, rounds that typically have a size of 100 million euros or above. These financing rounds, according to all the data, have been traditionally led by US or Asian firms, who many times bring the decision centers and operational functions of these companies to their regions. The founding contributors to the mandate are France, Germany, Spain, Belgium, and Italy, with a participation from the European Investment Bank as well. And such contributions amount to 3.75 billion euros that will be deployed in the coming years. And as a final remark, I would like to touch upon the RegTech investment landscape for 2023 and beyond. As said before, we are in a period of reflection on the side of VC investors, and despite the sharp decline in investment volumes in Q1 2023, especially in the growth segment, and therefore the importance of the European Tech Champions Initiative, I am confident that investment volumes will pick up again for a number of reasons. First, because European VC as an asset class has proven its good performance, and because of its long-term maturity, it has probably never been a better time in the last 3 years to invest in European tech, because now we are facing less competitive deals leading to lower valuations. And hopefully, with these companies mature and are ready to exit, the market will be again in an upcycle with higher valuations. Second, because RegTech is an increasingly important industry for the reasons mentioned in the beginning of this talk. An example of a success story in RegTech is an EIF portfolio company, Shift Technology. I mentioned that company before. Founded in France in 2013, the company has developed an automated fraud detection platform based on artificial intelligence, initially targeting the insurance industry. Its solution has been quickly adopted in a number of companies, for instance, in Singapore, where a pilot test in a local insurance company led to the detection of a terrorism finance scheme And as a result, SHIFT technology was adopted by all and every one of the insurance companies in the country. SHIFT technology became a European unicorn in 2021, 8 years after inception. And finally, and I think a very important point, the massive efficiency gains from the application of AI, and more lately, generative AI, will mark an era that will spur further innovation with unprecedented efficiency gains in the RegTech space. And this will lead to the creation of new tech champions in Europe. We have already seen the advantages of AI in pattern recognition with great results in process automation, like UiPath, for instance, data entry automation from complex documents to the electronic databases, or fraud detection, SHIFT technology, as I said before. But the real paradigm shift is generative AI, which opens a new world of innovation. Just a couple of thoughts. Can prospectus or regulatory fillings be automated completely? Can they be generated automatically by a generative AI platform? And just for the sake of the argument, could regulation itself at some point be suggested by generative AI after screening and analyzing fraud cases, newspapers, economic indicators, and the current regulation? All of this makes me certainly very optimistic about the future of RegTech, and I hope you share that optimism with me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the next segment of today's event. My name is Luca Mancuso, Business Development Associate at the Luxembourg House of Financial Technology, where RegTech startups and scale-ups can find a platform to connect with Luxembourg's financial center. Now, in this program, we have spent some time assessing governance models and exploring opportunities in investment within RegTech. And right now, we would like to take some time to dive deeper into how digital solutions can help today's compliance teams in effectively facilitate operations and ease burdens for chief compliance officers. In this realm, Luxembourg is no short of them, as close to 1/3 of RegTech startups are present here at the core of our finance plats. And today, we'll take some time to speak to Raoul Mulheims, CEO and co-founder at Finologee, one of Luxembourg's success stories and market leaders in innovative compliant platforms. So, Raoul, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
To kickstart our conversation, I would like to have an in-depth overview into what are the challenges of today that compliance officers face and how do compliance teams are looking to navigate them. And to open a parenthesis, how does Finologee look to target these pain points?
Let me start with the second one. We're not holistically covering all the areas, but okay. For a start, I think the main challenge, but this is the case for most of the financial industry actually, is digitization. So whereas in like 20, 30 years ago, everything in the KYC AML part, for instance, was done manually, today, we're trying to optimize, to make more efficient, to make more cost-effective all these processes, for instance, but also other areas in the regulation context tend to become more and more digital. And there you need to address these issues as a financial institution, as a regulated entity, obviously, also with the second challenge, which is the regulatory burden that's going to increase more and more over time. There will be more regulation over time, and we can see this with an increased frequency also at EU level, but also at national level, where compliance teams have been growing within the banks. I recently saw some statistics there that they have increased substantially and gone over the double-digit figure now in comparison to the whole staff that banks actually that work at banks today. So this is definitely something with the regulatory burden that has to be dealt with. Then also compliance teams today face also, but also it's about interfacing with these teams. It's the IT risk on the other side, let's say, of things where IT risk teams, IT security risk teams have to work closely together, also with let's say, the more traditional compliance teams. And there, right in the middle, lies sometimes the devil in the detail, but it's also it's a huge challenge because we're talking about two worlds sometimes. So it's all about risk management, but it's sometimes many institutions face these problems. It's a matter of two. It's a culture clash also, so to say. So it's two worlds actually that get together that need to find compromises addressing these. Another challenge will be the reporting, of course, or is already the reporting today, the part where actually you have to aggregate, you have to map the data, and you have to deliver it to authorities at various levels. There's a huge room for improvement there also in this area. And finally, one particular challenge where most financial institutions are facing today is the outsourcing challenge. So because even though we have a culture in Luxembourg about outsourcing that is pretty efficient, has been for quite some years with regulated IT providers actually, it's still something where at EU level we have seen additional regulation coming up, and that has to be dealt with both at a national and international level then, of course. So with Finologee, we're addressing three areas here today. So on one side, bank compliance. It's about, we have a solution for PSD2 compliance in the payments area, but it's more a regulation technology solution. It's not about payments, it's about authorizing the payments and allowing for access to the accounts. And then we also developed a mutualized, centralized platform that's handling the reporting by banks on account holders and safe deposit box holders. So that's a mandatory task that banks have to deal with, where they, on a daily basis, actually provide the identity and some additional data of all account holders to authorities, to the regulator. And then finally, we have an AML KYC solution, a centralized platform that allows then also our customers, insurance companies, fund industry companies, to deal with the life cycle of KYC files and addressing the AML issues there in the most efficient way.
Excellent. And in your expert opinion, are there any focuses, or would you like to put a focus on possible pain points and solutions that we should address for the future? Is it about internal upskilling? We talk about mutualization. Is there any specific direction you feel that should be taking?
Let me take it. It's actually these two directions. So it's on one side, one of the challenges, and the two are interconnected. One of the challenges we're facing today, most definitely, is that the teams that have been working and the staff that has been working on these tasks, that has done huge manual work, actually, playing the detectives, finding out who's behind the identity of a company opening an account and what is the structure in there and so on. And they are facing the challenge, actually, of dealing with these tasks, actually, in a digital way. So it's both, on one side, the upskilling that is needed for these teams to be able to deal with and to use these tools in the most efficient way, and also the reluctance sometimes that regulated entities are facing when they are trying to digitize their processes and so on, because, let's say, teams are not always the most eager, actually, to go there in that direction. But also from our experience, we've seen this with quite a few clients. Once we explain what they can do, what the teams can do, and how much easier it makes the day-to-day lives and the operations and the work they do, well, they buy in very strongly, actually, to these tools. So it's on one side, it's the upskilling, and on the other side, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. And then getting back to what I was referring to before, it's also about outsourcing. It's about how do you onboard digital solutions, especially for smaller players. I mean, larger banks typically have these teams. They are facing other challenges, obviously, for instance, but larger players have the skill set and have the internal teams and resources also to deal with bigger projects and so on. Where it becomes more complicated, it's smaller entities, mid-sized, mid-market entities and so on. Of course, they're getting helped by the service industry, by the consultants, of course. But on the other side, still, it's also mandatory for them to have the required skills to manage these infrastructures, then also to work efficiently together with their providers that they do have in an area where they still are in control. They both monitor but also control what is being done. And this is an issue in terms of digitalization when adopting these new infrastructures to deal with this in a both compliant and efficient way.
Brilliant. So you've talked about increasing regulatory burden. I'd like to open up, let's say, a point about how does the future look like for compliance teams? Is there any focus or trends that you see the current industry facing, along with what are the focus that a chief compliant officer should put on for its future purposes? Mm-hmm.
I think we have to make a difference between what we, let's say from an IT provider perspective, also consider as being the front end and the back end. Because both the challenges and the opportunities and the topics you need to address are somewhat different. They are obviously interconnected because it's all about the same business, but the challenges are somewhat different. At the front end, also what we see with consumer focusing, with mass market processes and so on, if ever you open an account with a digital bank, for instance, there you can see there's a lot of automation happening. Of course, always tied very closely to the risk levels and so on, and abiding by the rules at the regulatory level. But you wouldn't see these kind of evolutions of maximum automation at the front end with, for instance, a pure wealth manager addressing only ultra-high net worth individuals on the other side. Still, they may use some of the tools, for instance, to digitize a passport, an ID document actually, and to retrieve it, because also very rich people like to use the digital tools. But it's not. But the work they have to carry out is much more complex actually. So this is one of the issues they most definitely will have to address. And then it's as I said before, digitization is something that with the teams and how they were structured before, the compliance officer and the compliance teams will have to upskill most definitely their teams, and then also work way more closely together with other departments inside the banks, inside the investment companies, and inside the insurance companies. So these will be the chance. This kind of collaboration, actually, it's an issue because you cannot just work in silos in the pillars that you used to. You need to efficiently work together and collaborate on the issues. Otherwise, there will be lots of trouble actually facing them in this sense. Yes.
Brilliant. Perfect. So thank you for that. I think it's very enriching feedback that I'm sure will be of added value to our viewers. I don't think eventually we are placing any focus on other points. So I'd like to thank you for your participation. And in order to follow up for our next panel of today's event and program, I'd like to shift back the focus and hand the microphone to Chris Hollifield, Head of Business Development at Luxembourg for Finance.
Well, thank you very much, Luca and Raoul, for that very interesting segment on compliance technology. I'm now delighted to be joined in the studio by a lady who needs very little introduction. It's Karen O'Sullivan, who is head of the Innovation Payments, Market Infrastructures and Governments Department of the CSSF, and who is perfectly placed to discuss the the impact of RegTech on the industry being both responsible on the one hand for financial innovation, but also for the governance practices and policies implemented at financial services institutions. So, Karen, it's great to have you in the studio here today.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you. So maybe just to kick off, we could start with looking at some of the trends in RegTech. Obviously, the EBA published a consultation on the topic back in 2020, but the landscape, I assume, has evolved somewhat since then. How do you see RegTech solutions and interacting with regulated financial institutions, and what do you think is driving this from a regulatory standpoint?
Okay, so firstly, as you know, we don't actively monitor or follow the RegTech solutions themselves, but we have two main channels whereby we go into, or we are in contact with either the providers themselves or the use of the RegTech solutions. So the first kind of point of entry would be through our innovation hub, and that's where typically the solutions themselves or the providers of the solutions would come and present the solution to our innovation hub, and then we get a feel for what the solution is trying to tackle and what kind of issue or regulatory concern it could potentially help the financial institutions that we would be looking after. The other point of entry would be really through the supervisory teams as part of the ongoing prudential supervision. So again, as a regulated entity is going to be using a RegTech solution, typically they would come and explain it to the on-site, or sorry, the off-site supervisory team, just so that we would have an understanding. So they'd be the two kind of areas or how we would get information on the market. So our view of the overall market space and everything that exists mightn't be completely exhaustive, but that's kind of where our information will be coming from. I think if we look at the EBA report, so there was, 5 main segments where they saw the use of RegTech, or they identified the use of RegTech. So it was AML, fraud prevention, ICT, security risk and management, creditworthiness, and then prudential reporting. Yeah. Based on our interactions, I think the main areas that we see the use of RegTech in Luxembourg is along the same lines, and we would see it very much in anything that's AML related, so be it the onboarding of clients, the identification of clients, fraud prevention, fraud detection, or transaction monitoring. So really it's in the same areas. I think since the report, so it was back in 2020 or thereabouts, the segments themselves where there is the use of RegTech, I don't think has evolved a lot. However, what's probably evolved more or quicker at least is which technologies are being used in order to feed into those solutions. And I think there over the last couple of years, we've seen probably an uptake in the use of the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning in those solutions. I think the drivers for that evolution is really the regulatory kind of framework itself, in that as regulations continue to develop and more information is being required, and quite often that information is being required quicker and quicker, entities need to have some kind of a tool that'll help them kind of alleviate the human intensive kind of data extraction piece, so that the humans, if you like, can focus on the quality add in the analytics and provide that information to us. I think for me, the second driver, to a lesser extent perhaps, is really the digitalization generally of the processes within the entities. Because, I mean, if you think of it, a few years ago, to open a bank account, for instance, you had to go into a bank. You go into a bank, you sit in front of the bank clerk with your passport, your ID, and he can look at your passport, he looks at you and he says, yes, this is the same person, and the person is alive and moving, and it's the same person. I think today things are becoming more digital. The kind of the retail market is looking for things to be more digital, is looking for quicker turnaround times. So if we're going now to, online to open accounts, well, there needs to be tools on the other side to how can they still make sure that it's my passport that I'm showing and not somebody else. So I think they're the real drivers at the moment. And again, I don't think, or I'm not seeing a change in the segments, but more the types of tools that are being used in those segments.
No, I think that's really interesting, and very much tallies with, I think, people's experience post-pandemic of that kind of switch towards a more internet-based approach to financial services. And interesting also, considering the, shall we say, the focus on AI at the moment in the press, to see those tools actually being used for discrete use cases within RegTech in financial services. But maybe just to focus then on the financial institutions themselves that you're regulating. I mean, do you see them more developing them tools themselves internally, or is it rather making use of external service providers that are specialists in those areas of technology? And do you kind of have a preference maybe, or does this impact your supervision in some way?
Okay, so I think, again, it depends on the segment that those tools are being used for. I think at the moment when we're looking at tools that are more in the AML field or cybersecurity field, it's typically external providers and more off-the-shelf solutions that are there, that are tried and trusted and are well known, or kind of relatively well known, rather than spending a lot of time internally trying to build up an own in-house solution. For other areas, it's probably more and more in-house that's being used. Again, what we've seen in recent surveys and interactions is that the budgets that are being allocated internally to, say, playing with AI and machine learning are increasing, but we're not seeing it at this stage in kind of an increase in the in-house tools that are being put into production. But the investment, or the initial investment, is definitely there. And I think there, when we look at, again, AML as a key driver, the vast majority of the entities that we supervise would have some form of automated tools in place. And again, they're looking more and more at the use of AI within those tools. I think the impact on our supervision, it doesn't impact it that much insofar as what we supervise is really the risks of the entity and how the entity is covering those risks. So where an entity is using, be it an in-house developed tool or an off-the-shelf tool, what we would there supervise is, well, how is it helping the entity to kind of comply with their regulatory requirements? And in a way, how is the entity mastering or challenging or checking, overseeing the tool that they're using internally? To, you know, if it's AI, for instance, how are they looking to make sure there's kind of a human in the loop at some stage or some phase in it? How are they making sure that any bias is being corrected, that the techniques, the models are being regularly updated? So kind of the understanding internally that's there, but it's not really overseeing the use of the solution in itself. Where it's an external solution, I think there it depends on the relationship. So again, if it's we say a purchased external solution that's being used internally, it's like what I've just said, so looking at the risks and how it's been put into place. If it's an external solution, but that the service behind the solution is also being provided by the service provider, well, there we would possibly tend more towards an outsourcing type arrangement. In that case, we'll say that the normal outsourcing requirements, oversight and supervision on our side will kick in.
Okay, maybe just then moving away from the regulated entities and towards the regulators themselves. You know, digitalisation is obviously a key focus, I suppose, internally within the organisation of the regulators themselves. So, I mean, how do you see regulators adapting internally to these, making use of these tools themselves, perhaps?
So I suppose if we say that the increase in RegTech solutions being used by the regulated entities is partially because of the increase in the regulatory requirements, so that's information that ultimately is coming back to ourselves. So it doesn't make any sense that we're forcing, indirectly even, entities to invest in different tools and solutions if internally we're not equipped to deal with the information that we're getting. So clearly, as the outside market evolves, well, then we need to evolve internally. And I think that's an issue not just for the CSSF as regulator, but for regulators around the world. And I think, so one interesting aspect of, say, how subtech in that case rather than regtech can be used and is useful. So we have AI and machine learning, for instance, which are really evolving technologies from the regtech perspective. When we look at the supervisor side, there we have, for instance, projects around with the natural language techniques, and there it can be really useful in dealing or kind of reviewing, overseeing different assessments. So for instance, when you have assessments and you've got a large quantity of assessments coming in which has kind of supplementing information, by using these techniques it can get through the burdensome kind of labour intensive piece, free up then the agent's time so that they can focus then on the real kind of strange aspects or the real value added assessments that need to be done. So it's really can be used to remove the easily automated kind of initial layer. If we look to us then in Luxembourg, I think for the moment, clearly subtech is part of our digital strategy, so what we call CSSF 4.0. And I think at the moment the main focus is around data, so be it the data collection, the data validation internally, and how we're collecting that data. I think when it comes to the initial data collection, I mean, we're using portals essentially, and I think at this stage the market is used to it. I think the first one was the eDesk, which is there for a couple of years. I think it's July 2019 initially, which was guided or essentially for the investment fund sector, which now is being expanded out to cover also market operators. And it's really a portal for collecting the data initially from the regulated entities. And I think there it's really a kind of a one-stop place where all that data can be dumped by the regulated entities or people on their behalf, and that we can receive it. And there's two main ways that data is collected at the moment. So we have kind of what we call push, where it's the regulated entity who's pushing regular reporting or information to us, but we also have kind of a pull approach, and that's where it's more ad hoc for a particular theme. It's more like a survey or a kind of questionnaire based, where we need to get large amounts of data, and it's most probably well known in AML and the annual AML questionnaire, which is filled in online, and then we can receive and retrieve all that information. But for instance, that kind of solution was also used quite successfully during COVID-19, where we needed to collect a lot of liquidity information. So it's kind of the portal that way. Afterwards, internally, once we've collected all this data, so as I said, there's no point in having the data if we're not going to kind of exploit it and do anything with it. So then we have, again, tools to help us to basically exploit or to use and to validate the data. So there we have things like Power BI, whatever, where depending on whether it's kind of an overall like a quick and dirty snapshot of the information that we've received, or if we need the system to do a more detailed kind of analysis or kind of research on the information and give us a result. But we have several tools internally that we use. I think then going on from that, it's the channels that we're getting the information. And I think kind of the reporting entities have probably noticed a slight change in that we're shifting where possible away from the more kind of traditional email approach and receiving emails and information via emails. Firstly, because of the amount of data, and it's no longer appropriate to only exchange by email, but also because of the confidentiality sometimes of the data, and emails is error prone. So it's trying to switch or move from emails for really the data collection and standardize it as far as possible. So we've got the kind of historical channels that we're still using, but we're also looking to develop or to include more and more channels. And I think there the idea really is to standardize the information that we're trying to obtain as much as possible, to give the reporting entities kind of to make it as seamless as possible for them to submit the information to us, and then we can do what we need to do behind that.
Yeah, so automated channels in for the majority of that kind of standardized data, basically. And then maybe, I mean, you've already touched on this to a certain extent, but the future, how do you see the landscape developing and around RegTech, and what do you think are the upcoming challenges that you see in that respect?
So I suppose if we go back to the beginning and we say that the evolution or the uptake in RegTech is because of the regulation and the development in the regulation, unfortunately I don't see regulation stopping and not developing, and as part of the development of regulation is typically more information that needs to be submitted. So from that perspective, I think it's only natural to assume that the use of RegTech is going to continue, and then on the other side, regulators are going to have to develop the use of subtech as well to deal with the information. I think if we're looking at where the immediate changes are in the regulation, the two that spring to my mind at least is anything around ESG and DORA, which are the two big pieces that are coming there. And I think they're perfectly suited to using RegTech solutions. So if we look at ESG, there's a lot of the initial regulations that are there. It's around transparency and disclosure. And so what we see from the Innovation Hub perspective, so not yet from the supervisory teams that we have, but from the Innovation Hub, is a lot of solutions that are being developed to essentially help regulated entities meet those disclosure requirements and provide them the information that they would then need to disclose. When it comes to DORA, the nature of DORA being digital operational resiliency, there's going to be an impact on the governance and the internal organization, internal framework structuring of the companies. But again, there's also going to be an impact on how they have to, their risk management, particularly around cybersecurity. And again, those two aspects are typically things where RegTech can be very useful. So be it through AI, be it through machine learning, be it through other techniques. I mean, what we do see is more and more machine learning in cybersecurity solutions because, again, of the quantity of data that needs to be kind of assessed and analysed and categorised. And machine learning, it's very quick to pick out anomalies and to kind of flag issues that then can be treated afterwards. So I think there's going to be an uptake in the use of RegTech solutions.
Yeah, so clearly, obviously, an increasing regulatory burden and increased transparency requirements are a wind in the sails for RegTech firms that are providing those kind of data solutions. Yeah. And then obviously an increasing switch towards internet-based solutions requires greater levels of cybersecurity, and there again, RegTech plays an important role.
Which ultimately, is just going to add efficiency to the market because, again, it's going to help, the tools will help alleviate the initial research so that people can kind of focus on the key pieces.
Great, it's been wonderful having you in the studio again to talk about these issues and where you see things going from the supervisory perspective. I'd now like to hand back to Margot to sum up today's event. Thank you very much for listening.
I just want to conclude this event by thanking our great speakers. It was a pleasure to exchange some insights with you today. I especially take away from those discussions that RegTech will continue to have a growing importance for the financial industry in the months and years to come. Investing in RegTech is especially key for the future of compliance and the efficiency of financial institutions. And as we heard many times today, upskilling of the workforce, mutualization, and increased collaboration are primary focuses to reach the next step of optimization. A special thank you to our sponsor of the day, Elvinger Horst-Prussen, for supporting us with this event. Another thank you to our audience for joining us. I hope it was instructive to all of you. And don't forget to tune in for our next Focus On event, which will focus on Capital Markets Union in the 11th of May. And you will have the replay of this event available on our website, luxembourgforfinance.com. Have a good day and stay tuned.